everybody. My name's Jesse. I live in Texas, and I have enjoyed Portland a lot. And congratulations for all of you making it to the end of RailsConf. I always feel like my mind is just bulging at the end of this of these. In Houston, at the Houston Ruby Brigade, I like to introduce everybody by having everybody say when they first started in Rails. It seems like a good touchstone for what you've been through, what battles you've fought, right? So I'd like you to raise your hands if you've used at least Rails 3.2. Should be most of you. What about 3.0? 2.3? Wow. 1.0? 0.6? You are DHH? You have the 15 years experience with Rails that recruiters are emailing you about. Oh, you, nice. Way to go. Cool, so most Rails apps don't last your entire career, right? Most of the time, they're set aside. They become too old. They become too much of a pain to make use of. But what if they do? What if they last forever? What if they become these legacy apps that we read about, right? What if they are at American Airlines and run for 50 years until they stop running? What do we need to do with these apps so that they can continue to provide value, so that we can continue to maintain and use them? This is a reminder that Rails is not WordPress. You log into WordPress, any version, and you can basically press upgrade, and it'll upgrade you to the newest version. Your themes may not work, but Rails or WordPress would. Now, Rails isn't set up that way. In Rails, the code is constantly changing. Both the internal APIs and the external APIs, the ones that we use when we write Rails code, they're evolving and they're changing to fit what the best use case of development is at the time. What do we think is the best way to write applications? Thomas, he wrote this. He said, code is volatile. His first Rails commit, he was a Rails core guy. It's no longer in Rails. So even if you're writing the code that is Rails, it's going to get extracted. It's going to get removed. It's going to get refactored. This is a good thing, right? Sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but if Rails is constantly evolving and getting better, then we are constantly evolving and getting better. If the experience of writing web applications is evolving, then we're evolving, and this is a good thing. So why would you bother evolving your Rails apps? So you get new features, right? You get the cool API features. If you're creating an API, you can make better use of your databases with Postgres enhancements that come. So there are features that you get. The second are security updates. This is not a trivial matter, right? There are Rails 0.8 blog engines running out there that if anybody found out about them, you could just send JSON parameters to them, right? So security updates is a big deal to keep your apps online and running. Your Ruby language could get end-of-lifed, right? 1.8.7 does not have that much longer to go before it's completely end-of-lifed. And this in and itself is not a great thing to be running on a language that will not receive any updates from then on. Right now, the sort of old Rails app, Touchstone, is a 2.3 application. There are a lot of 2.3 applications out there right now just chugging away providing business value. There's some high-profile ones, right? GitHub is probably the most high-profile Rails 2.3 app out there right now. And I bet a lot of you have it too, right? That's why you're in this talk. So what do we do with them? We're going to talk about a framework that you can use to upgrade your Rails apps. But first, let's go back. let's take a step back in time of Rails app lore and look at what life was like in a 1.0 app and beyond. So Rails 1.0, there's a fair number of you that use this version. RJS ruled the world at this point, right? You had JavaScript that your Rails app would control the screen. I remember seeing this and being blown away, right? The biggest change here was that you'd have Rails apps that would update specific portions of a page and then do that cool highlight, right? The flashing yellow for what was just changed. Nowadays, that's not good enough. We need it to constantly auto make changes based on what other people are collaborating. But back then, this was great. And it really set Rails apart, right? It really set the notion of JavaScript interactivity forward. But this is the code that would exist in the controller. Page.replace HTML, the ID, and then the content that you'd want it to replace. You'd also have link to remote, link to function. The interesting thing about this is the URL, right? Your view could tell the controller what method that it wanted to execute, and then do so by saying the controller name, the action, and the ID. And these would be strewn all over the application, right? Your route file would probably have a single line that was match controller / action / ID, and that's all that you would ever do. Your actions in your controller would test if it was a post and then make a change. You look back now, and you're like, what is this? What were we thinking? It was a dramatic step forward at the time, but right now, if you had, like, this would be hard to upgrade, right? What about source control? Well, in a 1.0 application, it was state-of-the-art to be on Subversion. So a lot of your older applications may not even be on Git right now. They could be on Subversion, or I even just saw one. Legit was on CVS. Not awesome. So we flash forward to 2.3. 2.3, widely regarded as the grail of Rails applications, right? Like very popular, very stable, and things were good. So what did a 2.3 app look like? Well, a 2.3, when it launched, it did not have bundler set up with it, right? So you would set up your gems in the application. So it would be like config.gem, and you'd list your gem. Gems, in and of themselves, were a huge step forward from 1.0. The reason is that gems could be versioned, right? Whereas your plugins were not. They would just get the latest code from a repository and download them. Gems could say, I want to work for version 1.0 or 2.0. And if they go to 3, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to stick on this same gem. And things were good. But of course, this was optional. So you have some Rails 2.3 apps out there that don't even specify their gems in here. They just happen to be installed on the dev server or the hopefully the production server, and you just say like require will paginate, and it's just there. This is the active record query interface. This didn't change much from 1.0 to 2.3, where you just say like find and either all or one or first, and then give it the conditions. So everything sort of was off of the find. That was your API. Rails 2.3 is widely, right, regarded as the pinnacle of Rails development by people who romanticize Rails 2.3. But the interesting thing is, like, why? Why did a lot of people stop at 2.3? So what did 3.0 happen? What happened in Rails 3.0? This was the big merge with MERB and a wide range of changes. So the query interface to Arel changed, right? This is probably the deepest change in the application. So instead of the find with conditions, Now it's like wheres that you can chain together. Scopes sort of rule the world. And this is good, right? If you're running new applications, this is great. As compared to the Rails 2.x land, this is completely different. You also got a great abstraction. In Rails 3.0, suddenly active model became a thing. This led to a wide variety of stuff that you can do in Rails 3 and beyond. It is so much easier to have objects like poor old Ruby objects that you can have in a form. This open stuff for like Mongoid. So active model was a great thing. Having an abstraction that active record then depended on it is very cool. Also, a big change was the routes. So the concepts are still the same, but the syntax completely changed. The syntax is pretty cool in Rails 3, but it's completely different than 2.3. What about 3.1? Well, in 3.1, we got the asset pipeline. So we have comments in CSS and comments in JavaScript that combine all of our files into one file, and the application itself is better, right? It's faster. We're not making 10 to 20 different HTTP requests just to load a single page. So the app is faster. This was tough, right? For me, the 3.1 upgrade is often harder than the 3.0 upgrade, getting all of your CSS and JavaScript to work with the asset pipeline. The end result is a file that has the hash of the file in the file name itself. So it's fast, and new browsers get the new version instantly every time. That's pretty much it in Rails 3.1 out. 3.2 is basically a better 3.1. So it was faster in a dev environment. And we got some cool stuff, though. We got Pluck, which I think is very cool. So you can use this to get arrays of IDs or arrays of whatever based on a bunch of queries. I like Pluck. It's better all around. And then mass assignment became a thing. It became a thing we started to worry about, that you couldn't just take all form parameters and send them to your model, especially when you included this with like nested params. We saw this on a well-publicized hack into GitHub where somebody used the GitHub save form to traverse up the tree and give themselves commit rights to Rails. So what happened? We came out and we said, okay, mass assignment is a thing. Let's specify what values are safe to change in something called adder accessible in the model itself. Now we're at 4.0. 4.0 brings some wicked awesome Postgres stuff. If you do one thing after this, watch Adam Sanderson's talk from Monday on the Postgres, the features you're already using, and it will make you want to upgrade to 4.0, just those features by itself. You also get some caching, right, in 4.0, Russian doll caching, and strong parameters. So we just learned how Rails 3.1 brought us adder accessible and for mass assignment. Strong parameters is a complete change in both theory and execution of how we should handle that problem. So strong parameter says, let's not do it on the model, let's do that on the controller and have the controller decide what fields are permissible in that context to update the model with. Turbolinks is a thing. And overall, Rails 4.0, the absolute best version I've used. So how do we get there? There are two ways that we can take an older application and have it become a newer application. Your users will see it as an upgrade, right? A newer version. So we can either upgrade by a wholesale rewrite of the application or by refactoring it, right? Rewrite is Rails new, and refactoring is going through a step of changes to upgrade it over time. The decision to rewrite an application is not a technical one, right? What I mean by this is that it is an organizational decision if the organization has the fortitude to actually rewrite an application. If you sit down with your technical team and you're like, I want to rewrite this application, and I want to remove all of this cruft that came in over time. I want to take this feature down that nobody uses. I don't want to do this. This is silly. This time, we'll do it right. If you do this, you'll likely fail unless the entire organization comes together and is on board. In most cases that I have personally seen, this is not the way that it happens. The way that it happens is the dev team has in mind that they can make better decisions now than they made before because they have more information now. But the more information now that they have is they are using different features than maybe the product owners are using, or more importantly, selling to their users, right? So the product owners and the people that pay the tech salary are like, no, I made a sale based on this one feature. I know that it has value. And so you have this idea that, yes, I can do it in this amount of time because I'm going to be able to cut out all of this stuff. But then the same conditions occur this year than they did 3 years ago that lead to the same assumptions, same products, and same features that just have to be rebuilt. The definition of done on a rewrite is incredibly difficult because not only do you have to add all of the features that you added once upon a time, but it has to be better, right? The goal line of a rewrite is so much harder than the goal line of just making it incrementally better. So how could you fail by doing a rewrite? If you don't have every single feature, it'll likely be seen as a bug. It was there, and now it's not, and now I'm mad. What about keeping product momentum? If you were to say, I'm going to start rewriting now, then you have to almost pause development for that rewrite time, right? And so then you're thinking, like, I've got to get this out the door, out the door, out the door, but your users aren't seeing anything, so they're seeing no changes during this rewrite time. And your users, like we're talking about, they're not going to see anything worthwhile. They don't care about your Rails version. They don't care that you're now on Ruby 2.0 and you were on 1.87. They might care if it's faster, but generally what we think is faster, users don't care about, right? If you drop the average mean response time from 500 milliseconds to 250 milliseconds, you're like, yes, I doubled my app. And users are, meh. There are specific conditions in which I would advocate a rewrite. One is you have PHP on Rails. So if a PHP on Rails is an application where the controller has a lot of methods, the models have no methods, and your views have all of the things. So they are long, they have nested if statements, they are the ones that actually go out and do the article find by ID, params of ID, and then loop over them. They're the ones that maybe make decisions about where to send routes to. This happens when you hire new Rails devs, set them down, and say, create. So if you have PHP on Rails, you don't really have Rails. You may consider a rewrite at this point. What if you vendored Rails and vendored gems? I've talked to some people here at this conference that have this exact same problem. So they've got a Rails 2.3 app. They have vendored Rails. They have vendored all of their gems, which means that they are in like /vendor, right? The Rails 1.0 is like freeze Rails. And what happens here? What happens is that if you find that you have a bug or you want to change the behavior of a system, you've got devs that just go in and change Rails. They go in and they change gems. And what happens at this point? If you don't have a pretty accurate change log or pretty accurate test suite, you don't have Rails anymore, you've got Bob Rails, right? And this becomes incredibly difficult if the changes are substantive. This will become hard to just upgrade Rails at that point, because you're going to overwrite your changes. So let's say you don't have Bob Rails, and you don't have PHP on Rails. You can refactor by a series of tiny wins, getting each of those into production over time. So you don't go from 1.2 to 4.0, the title of this talk notwithstanding. You go from 1.2 to 2.3, and 2.3 to 3.0. And you get to a series of stable points, get those into production, get feedback, and continue on. In addition, you can add features for your users at each of these points. So you're continuing to add value. So what are the main upgrade pains in taking an old app, like a 2.3 app, all the way to a brand shiny new 4.0 Russian doll cached application? So here are the main points, right? You've got 2.3, 3.0, 3.1, and 4. 3.2 is, if you're going to 4, you can skip 3.2. So what am I asking you to redo at each of these stages? If you're getting to 2.3, mostly it's about gems. Mostly it's about getting your gem file in order. It means looking at everything that you're requiring in your 2.3 or below application and making sure that that's specified in your gem file with the version that works, right? Most gem files that I see don't have version information stamped on them. They're just will paginate. If you ever actually do a bundle update, or if you were to try and extract out and do it, it's very unlikely that when you run bundle, that's going to work. You need the version, or in most cases, the branch that is Rails 2.3 compatible. Get that into your gem file, and if you get that up and working, you have made significant progress. 3.0. There's only 3 things that you have to rewrite. One is your router. So if you, in a Rails 2.3, just have the controller action ID specified, you likely need to change that and come up with a router that makes sense. Likely RESTful routing, but something that makes sense, that accurately describes what is going on. Ask you to rewrite your JavaScript. So let's say that you have a 2.3 app. It's likely written with prototype, right? It's likely written link to function, link to remote. So we need to change those over to unobtrusive JavaScript. This is hard. This is a big step. Lastly, you've got your queries that you have to change. And by this, I mean your active record interface, right? So this is changing from find by with conditions to a series of scopes and like model.where. It will be easiest to do this if you take your find bys and create class methods that represent what that is bringing to the table. So if you've got find all conditions publish true, change that to post dot find all conditions, or find all published, right? Write that method, have that change to the Arrow interface. You do that change in Rails 2.3, right? Get everything underneath your model. So you get that up and running, it is seriously time to celebrate. If you get that into production, you're good to go. At this point in time, you are likely moving to Ruby 1.9.3. Mostly There's not very many changes that you have to do with that. If you're doing some crazy threading, stop. But mostly you weren't doing that anyway in 1.8.7, right? So now we move over to Rails 3.1. Here again, asking you to just rewrite your CSS and your JavaScript. Why do I say rewrite at this point? It's more about organizing, but in Rails 2.3, it was very, and even 3.0, it was very common to have a series of JavaScript tags, one per page that you would have, where it would only impact that page because you were only including it on that page. So it had free reign to change whatever page that it wanted. It didn't have to play nicely with the other pages. That's what this is all about, is bringing all of those CSS files into your app assets style sheet folder and then making sure that they play nicely with others. So if you were already using an asset packaging tool like Jamit or one of the others, this is going to go easy for you. But if you weren't, then you have to look at your CSS file and see which are overriding the others. Mostly, this is a case of moving all of your CSS files into app assets style sheets and looking at all your pages and seeing what doesn't look right. Same goes with JavaScript, whereby if they were overreaching and they were trying and they don't play nicely with others. So when you actually rewrite in 3.0 to jQuery unobtrusive style, make sure that they play nicely. Have that thinking when you rewrite that you should be more selective about what you're attaching to. Decent way to do this is add a tag for the controller to the body tag, and then have your jQuery, if it's attaching to events just on that page, have it look at the body tag with the data controller ID, right? Or the action, and have it only specify items there. That way, when they're all put together later, it'll all just work nicely. You get your Rails 3.1 app online and users are happy, do a jig. You have earned it. This is a good thing. In Rails 4.0, I'm just asking you to basically go into your controllers and rewrite your forms. This is implementing strong parameters. And then everything else is just a gem file update in Rails 4.0. And if you get to Rails 4.0, congratulations. Now you can start preparing for Rails 4.1. So to recap, Rails 2.3 with Bundler, Rails 3.0 with Arrow, 3.1 with the asset pipeline, 4.0 with gem file updates. Golden. There's some tips to getting to 3.0. Let's say that you are heavily invested in prototype. Heavily invested, not just in prototype, the JavaScript library, but in the entire idea of the controller updating the page. There's a gem called Prototype Rails. It was extracted from Rails in 3.0, and it will continue to work right now. And if you don't want to rewrite or refactor your views, you can continue to use this. This is pretty cool, right? This can get you major instant wins by being able to upgrade with Prototype Rails. The downside is that Prototype by itself doesn't have a no conflict mode, right? It's just got the $, so it wants the $. jQuery also wants the $, right? It's all about the money. And so you can turn jQuery into no conflict mode. You can have your code be no conflict mode. The trouble comes in when you use libraries that don't use no conflict mode. Because then you get really weird JavaScript errors about like no selector and path and stuff like that. Twitter Bootstrap has in the past had this problem where the authors inside just use $. So you have to look at the code of the libraries that you're using and see if they are writing it in a jQuery no conflict style, which they should. You should edit it and submit pull requests. Rails autolink, this is used not as frequently, but it exists. It is a thing. And it will help you if you are big into users submit content and you want to show a link for anything that they add, you can use this. If you attended Brian's talk on doing this, you'll likely want to make sure that I can't have a link that has JavaScript in it. So you need to take a look at that, but this will help with that. Deprecated finders is good too. So if you don't want to rewrite all of your find by with conditions, you can use this. What is the lifetime of these, though? You generally have one major Rails version with these gems that have been, with this code that has been extracted out into gems before they're going to start breaking, and no one's going to care. You can take advantage of these, fork, and maintain, but that's not really how, unless you love these and want to do that, that's not really how you want to be spending your time. You want to add features, right? So you can use this as a life vest and then begin to move away. For example, if you have a 2.3 app, you've upgraded it to a 3.2 app, but you didn't necessarily come up with a new user interface, right? You didn't change it. You use the prototype Rails to make sure that the link to functions work and that the controller can send code because it's sort of spaghetti and you have in your mind that you're going to upgrade everything. At some point, you need to upgrade that, right? At some point, you need to get your JavaScript house in order. So this can help you, but you can't depend on this long term. So we need to talk about authentication. In your 2.3 apps and in your 1.0 apps, your authentication was often access authenticatable, authentication module, some code you found that you put in the lib directory that hashed passwords and worked. But we need to upgrade that. In that same talk, Brian talked about how if you're using SHA as your password, that it can be hacked within a couple weeks using hobbyist hardware. A couple weeks doesn't sound ominous, but you shouldn't be able to do this. It should take you something like the lifetime of the universe plus a couple years to have true password strength, right? And that's what bcrypt provides. So we need to upgrade your authentication systems. What does this mean? Well, you don't know your user's passwords, right? Right? You can't get them back. And so what you're going to have to do is go ahead and bite the bullet, install Devise or Sorcery, even AuthLogic, right? You can install those, get them set up, and then you're going to have to email your users a click here to reset or change your password. Your users are going to say, that is weird, something is up. I wish there were a way around this, but there's not, right? There is something up. If you're not using bcrypt, your passwords are not as secure as they need to be. Now for fun stuff. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to always be upgrading, right? There's that sales thing of you're always be closing. So what you need to be doing is you need to always be upgrading. There is a percentage of time of your day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year life that you should be spending upgrading applications. This does not mean maintaining apps, but this means staying current on what is changing. Right now, DHH's additions to Rails tend to be gems that he writes for inclusion later. So this means that you can and probably should be installing on your 3.2 apps, even if it's a fake 3.2 application, just install strong parameters, install cache digest, and see what it's like. This is great to do at Ruby meetups, right? Your local Ruby meetup. And you're like, hey, who's got to talk? Who wants to talk about something? Just download and install and try to get working one of these new apps. That way, when Rails 4.0 comes out, all you're doing is saying, oh yeah, I know how to do strong parameters. I know how to do Russian doll caching. You can take advantage of them before, which will make future upgrades faster. So whether that time is 5% of your time looking at Rails change logs that are coming through, whether that's a little bit more or a little bit less, it should be something that you're constantly doing. Because Rails just changes so often. And if you ignore the changes, you get to the point where maybe some of you are at in your organizations where you can't even use the newest gem that you want to use because you're so far behind. That is why the 2.3 to 3.0 is starting to take place, right? I'm seeing more and more people that are interested in upgrading from 2.3 to 3.0 over time. So there's this checklist of stuff that you have to do. I mean, I described like big swaths of stuff for you to do. Upgrade your CSS. But what you need is you need a little checklist of everything that you need to do. So I created one for you. And so you can go here. This is launching like today. Rails upgrade checklist. It's a completely free list of everything that you need to do to get from 1.2 to 4.0. And it looks like this. So the idea is that you have this list of things that you need to do. And if you follow it, you'll probably get, say, 90% there. One of the cool things that you can do is if you look at the source code, it's just Markdown. You can copy that and paste it into a GitHub issue, and it'll look like this. And these are fully functioning checkboxes. So you can check them. Right? Wait. Check them. I would recommend that you would divide these up into issues, right? You would divide, get to 2.3, that's an issue. Then check it as you go. Get to 3.0, and you check it as you go. Right? Because you should be deploying and getting feedback on each of these things. If you tried to take a 1.0 app and get it to 4.0 without user feedback, you could even be spending time on the completely wrong items. So you need to get to a point and then see where you're at. Get to a point and see where you're at. It's like validate it. Okay, thanks. My name's Jesse.